Dear friends, is the entire world really engulfed in flames? Or is this image, just like the corona pandemic narrative, the result of deliberate panic mongering designed to make us believe that the world is on fire? To make us believe that the only way out for us is to spend all our tax money, hundreds of billions of dollars and euros, on insane wars that nobody wants, but from whose industrialized mass killings a few monsters profit immensely. To pay hundreds of billions of dollars and euros on insane carbon taxes and carbon trading from which a few monsters profit immensely. And to make us pay hundreds of billions of dollars on surveillance agencies that exist to censor and abolish free speech, so that anyone voicing opinions that are critical of, for example, gender insanity can be framed and canceled and then criminalized as right-wing and anti-Semitic, and then to be thrown into jail, once again allowing a few monsters to reap the profits from this. Don't forget, for example, that Mark Zuckerberg a couple of months ago admitted that Facebook was forced to censor anything critical of the corona measures. Here's the thing. I learned through the corona pandemic that we can trust neither the mainstream media nor the politicians nor the pseudoscientists when they make their allegedly independent, science-based panic announcements. I do feel partially vindicated, but by that new German court decision of September the 3rd, 24, explaining that, one, the German equivalent of the CDC, the RKI, was not an independent science-based institution when it told us that there was a deadly new virus that required all those measures, but that it was a captured agency that was nothing but a mouthpiece for our equally captured puppet politicians. And two, the court decided that the so-called vaccines did not do what the puppet politicians and the RKI told us it would do. This is, in my view at least, a very good first step in the right direction, and an irreversible one too, as it has opened the floodgates to free speech again. So after that, to me at least, eye-opening experience with the pandemic, I don't feel that I at least can trust anything that the same people who brought us the pandemic are telling us now. What does that mean beyond the pandemic, that is? Well, I am ashamed to have to admit that for many years the word Palestinian to me was synonymous with terrorism, because that's what we were told after the terrorist attacks on the Olympic Games in 1972. That was in Munich. I knew, of course, that Palestinians had, quote-unquote, lost a huge chunk of their land in 1948 when it was taken from them to create Israel as a country for Jewish people. But for some reason, this fact never played any role in the official narrative, so that I, at least subconsciously, believed that there was a good reason for this fact being deleted from the official narrative. And the fact that for decades now the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank have lived in occupied territory that is now under siege was somehow lost on me. But just like with the pandemic, your views sometimes change drastically when you're forced to take a look at the other side of the story. And all of a sudden, you start to remember things and the fog of the official narrative clears. Now, for more than a year now, I had the opportunity to see both sides of the story and then make up my own mind. I watched the same story being told by the German, the British, the French, and Turkish mainstream media. As far as gender insanity and virus-induced pandemics and CO2-induced climate change and the Ukraine is concerned, they were all towing the same line. But with respect to Gaza and now Lebanon, the Turkish news channel TRT World broke ranks and delivered a vastly different account of what was really happening on the ground in Gaza. They're the only news channel that has reporters on the ground who calmly but visibly shaken tell and show their viewers the completely dehumanized horror that has now killed more than 43,000 people since October the 7th, 70% of whom are women and children. Over the last, let's say, three months or so, the worldwide protests that are growing bigger and bigger have forced the other mainstream media to not ignore this any longer. Their news presenters' faces show that they're shocked too. Only the German mainstream media continue to talk about Israel's right to defend itself. But how can the deliberate targeting of schools, hospitals, children, healthcare workers, and journalists, and the deliberate destruction of the entire infrastructure there in that occupied territory that has no army, how can the bombing of 10 cities with fighter jets and the shelling of hospitals with tanks, how can that be self-defense? If you have seen the movie Apocalypse Now, with final scenes with Marlon Brando whispering over and over again the horror, you know what he had in mind if you've seen what's been going on in Gaza over the last year. Self-defense? To me, it looks like that's what the Palestinians and now the Lebanese can claim. And this, my view, is based not just on the reporting that I've seen on TRT, but it is based specifically on extremely disturbing, eye-opening insights that were provided through the interviews of highly critical Jewish politicians, investigative journalists, and others, like Jill Stein, the Jewish American running for the presidency for the U.S. Green Party, and most recently, the president of the U.S. Middle East Project, Daniel Levy. They, too, they're trying to silence them. But, of course, you can't really frame them as right-wing anti-Semites. No, they're being framed as mentally unstable, self-hating Jews. This doesn't work anymore, though. Now, in the U.S. swing states, Wisconsin and Michigan, a very large group of Muslim Americans is voting for Jill Stein, or even for Donald Trump, as he, despite all the other rhetoric, promises peace, but not for Harris, as she is viewed as a all-wash and no hangout person, an empty suit and with no moral compass. I believe that on Tuesday, the 5th of November, Donald Trump will win the presidency. He has already announced that RFK Jr. will have a very important position in healthcare in his administration. And this indicates to me, at least, that Trump, who was highly suspicious of what Fauci tried to tell him about the pandemic, will have RFK Jr. conduct a thorough investigation of the pandemic. After all, after I had published my 50-minute video in September of 2020 on how the PCR test was deliberately misused to create cases that didn't exist in order to commit what I considered even then as crimes against humanity, RFK Jr. set up the PCR test working group. This group met once a week with dozens of high-profile scientists, lawyers, doctors, and politicians. And at the end of 2021, he and I met for an extensive discussion on of a legal strategy on how to best attack the measures and go for damages. We'll see what happens. But one way or another, the pandemic fraud will be exposed. We're ready. Regardless of what else happens, we're ready. That is myself, the international group of attorneys. We have all the evidence. We have access to all the experts. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I received a brand new paper on the PCR test fraud from a good friend and scientist. Now, let me get back to the idea of self-defense for a moment. In a self-defense situation, that is when you're under attack, anything that is necessary to stop the attack is okay. Now, if you take the facts of my current situation, the legal analysis of these facts shows clearly that this is a self-defense situation. We have a kidnapping from Mexico, deliberately disguised as a fake deportation and or as a fake extradition. We have a complete denial of a fair hearing. We have a refusal to allow the defense's witnesses to be heard in order to counter the latest version of the charges that they invented. And we have a 5-month period of what is called white torture. Solitary confinement, transportation to and from the court in chains and shackled, accompanied by heavily armed guards and police who wear bulletproof vests and tell me each time that I refuse to wear a bulletproof vest and sign a waiver for that, tell me that there is a possibility that a stray bullet may hit and kill me. That definitely qualifies as white torture, which is designed to drive people into insanity and make them commit suicide. So, here we have it. This is self-defense. However, I think there is a better version of self-defense than the one that most people have in mind. I believe that there is a good case to be made in the United States, in the state of California, a good case for damages for what has been done to me and to my clients. At the time of my kidnapping, my primary place of residence was our ranch in California. I was and still am a California attorney. I'm licensed to practice law in the state of California, and I was working on a complaint for damages for all those who suffered damages from the measures for an international group of clients. I won't go into the details of how we will argue this case, but the remedy, that is the money damages to be received for me and my clients because I have been taken out of business by the state of Lower Saxony, could be, for example, to seize the 20% of VW shares that are owned by the state of Lower Saxony, which is responsible for everything. Now, those VW shares are traded on the New York Stock Exchange and can therefore be seized easily in the United States. Now, that would give Trump a good way to, let's say, own one of the most important pieces of the German automotive industry, and vice versa. The German employees, the workers, would profit from this as well. This is almost like 80 years after the first time the United States and Allied powers freed Germany and liberated Germany. This is the second time. So the Germans would probably be happy, at least the employers would be happy to be free of a government's influence, and they won't have to build electronic junk that nobody wants to buy. But finally there would be a real management, maybe, along the lines of the Iacocca. Again, I don't want to go into the details of this, but I think this case can be made. Remember that in 2017, I filed the so-called amicus curiae brief, which is a friend of the court letter, a letter as a friend of the court, in a class action case against Deutsche Bank, the bank of the criminals. The amount in controversy, that is the money that the parties were fighting over, was $85 billion. I explained to the court that Deutsche Bank had not just acted negligently when they caused damage to the plaintiffs, but with intent, thus opening the door to punitive damages. Punitive damages can easily add 10 or even 20 times the amount that the parties are asking in damages, which would then add up to a really grand total. A couple of weeks later, I explained this case at DB's annual shareholders meeting, and I told the roughly 4,500 shareholders who were present and DB's management, including DB's CEO, who happened to be my former boss in Tokyo, Japan, about this case and the risks of this case. The management sat there stone-faced. But 2 or 3 weeks later, DB settled the case. And a few months later, the CEO's former secretary, who I ran into at a private party by accident, told me that the entire board of directors was shocked when I gave my presentation. So even though they kept the settlement secret, I'm sure it cannot have been cheap for Deutsche Bank. To make a long story short, I believe that there will be many good reasons for us to be dancing in the streets soon, regardless of which version of that song you prefer, the Jagger and Bowie one or the original one by Martha and the Vandellas. I think we can look forward to that.